At a vineyard estate in the hill country under strings of warm Edison lights with 200 people holding glasses of sparkling wine and leaning into the people they loved most, one man sat alone at the back table. 200 eyes turned toward him the moment the groom said his name into the microphone. Daniel Shaw, a single father who had made himself invisible for 15 years, felt the full weight of every stare land on him at once. He hadn't been weak. He hadn't given up. He had made a choice, a long, deliberate, quiet choice to disappear into the work of raising his daughter, to become the stable thing, the constant thing, the thing that didn't leave. But tonight, under those lights, surrounded by all that love that wasn't his, he had been found. The only question was whether he still knew what to do once someone was looking. That moment at the vineyard, though, that was still 3 days away. Right now, Daniel Shaw was standing in his kitchen in East Austin, holding a cream-colored envelope he'd pulled from the stack of mail on the counter. The return address said Ryan and Diane Holt. He hadn't spoken to Ryan in over a decade, hadn't thought about him much either. Life had a way of making that easy. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. He slid the invitation out. Ivory cardstock gold lettering the whole production. Black tie. Vineyard Estate. +1. Warmly encouraged. Daniel read the date, slid the card back inside, and dropped the envelope at the bottom of the recycling bin. Buried it under a grocery circular in last week's newspaper. He told himself it was practical. He had no reason to go. Ryan had built a life that moved on a frequency Daniel no longer operated on. That was fine. People drifted. That was just how it worked. The next morning, Sophie found it. She came downstairs holding the envelope between 2 fingers the way she held things she intended to use as evidence. Her dark hair was still in a braid from sleep, and she had that look on her face, the focused, patient one she'd inherited from him and then weaponized against him. She was 17. She'd long since stopped letting him get away with things. "You were going to throw this away," she said. Not a question. She set it on the kitchen table between them. Daniel poured his coffee and kept his eyes down. He could feel her waiting. Sophie was excellent at waiting. He'd taught her that, and now he regretted it. "I don't know Ryan anymore," he finally said. "It's been 15 years. People change." Sophie sat down across from him and folded her arms on the table. She didn't pick up her phone. She didn't look away. That was when Daniel knew this wasn't going to be a short conversation. "You're going," she said. "Lily," he caught himself. "Sophie." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm not going to a wedding where I don't know half the room just because some guy I used to be close with decided to send me an invitation out of nostalgia. It's not about Ryan," she said. Her voice dropped, not sharp but heavier than usual, like she'd been carrying this for a while. "It's about you." Daniel set his mug down. "What does that mean?" Sophie leaned forward. "Dad, I'm leaving for college in 4 months. And I'm scared. I'm actually scared that the second I go, you're going to just stop, like a clock that only runs when someone's watching it." He opened his mouth, closed it. She kept going. "You've spent my whole life making sure I had everything. You gave up your friends, you stopped going out, you turned yourself into my dad and nothing else. And I love you for it. I do. But when I leave, and I am leaving, I need to know you know how to be a person. Not just my person, an actual person." Daniel felt something give way somewhere in his chest, something quiet and structural. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her she was being dramatic, that he was fine, that he'd always been fine. But the truth was sitting right there between them on the kitchen table, and it was not going to move just because he wanted it to. He had become invisible. Not to her, to himself. He had built a routine so exact, so efficient, so sealed, that it had stopped feeling like a choice years ago. Work, home, dinner dishes, repeat. He'd told himself it was enough. That fatherhood was enough. That needing nothing else was a kind of strength. But it wasn't strength. It was disappearing in slow motion, and his 17-year-old daughter had noticed what he hadn't let himself see. "I'm not asking you to become a different person," Sophie said, quieter now. "I'm just asking you to go to one wedding. Talk to somebody. Let someone see you. Just once." Daniel looked at his daughter and saw both things at the same time, the girl he'd raised and the woman she already was. She was right. She was always right. He found that exhausting. "Fine," he said. "I'll go." Sophie smiled, a full, real smile, the kind she didn't give away easily. "Good. And you're staying the whole time. No leaving after the salad course." He raised an eyebrow. I didn't agree to that. She was already off her chair, snatching the invitation. Too late. This is going on the fridge. The week before the wedding moved slowly. Daniel thought about it more than he wanted to. He hadn't been to a social event, a real one, not a school function or a parent-teacher conference in years. He didn't own a suit that still fit. He had to drive to the mall, and even that felt strange, like visiting a country whose customs he'd forgotten. The salesman at the men's department asked questions, tried to make conversation. Daniel gave short answers until the man got the message. The morning of the wedding, Sophie helped him with his tie. She stood in the hallway in front of him, her hands confident and sure, and he realized she had learned this somewhere without him, without asking, and that was either wonderful or devastating. He hadn't decided yet. She stepped back to check her work. "You look good." Daniel glanced at the mirror. He looked like a man who had found a costume. "I look like I'm going to a job interview." Sophie rolled her eyes. "You look like someone who's about to have a decent time. Try to remember what that feels like." He drove out to Hartwell Vineyard alone. The estate sat at the end of a long gravel road, and the hill country spread out on either side, cedar and limestone, big sky going gold in the late afternoon. Under different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. He parked at the far edge of the lot where the older cars were. Sat in his truck for 10 minutes with both hands on the wheel. He could still leave. Ryan probably wouldn't notice until seating. Nobody would miss him. He could tell Sophie he'd stayed the whole time and she'd never know. She'd know. She always knew. He thought about what she'd asked him. Not the question she said out loud, but the one underneath it. "Do you even know how to exist without me?" He didn't have an answer, but he owed it to her to try to find one. He got out of the truck, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the entrance. His heart was doing something it hadn't done in 15 years. The reception hall was everything he'd expected and quietly dreaded. Soaring ceilings strung with Edison bulbs and trailing greenery. Tables draped in linen the color of old cream. Flowers spilling over everywhere, dusty rose, ivory, sage. A string quartet in the corner playing something that made the whole room feel like a film he wasn't cast in. Everywhere he looked, people were together, leaning into each other, sharing inside jokes. Moving through the room with the ease of people who knew exactly where they belonged, Caleb found the seating chart near the entrance. His name was on a small card. Table 22. He scanned the room, found it near the back, half hidden behind a structural pillar and a tall arrangement of eucalyptus. Relief moved through him like cool water. He could sit with his back to most of the room. He could make himself small. He could survive this. The table was half occupied when he arrived. Two couples in their 50s sat deep in a conversation that had clearly been going on for years, the kind that requires no new material. They barely glanced up. Daniel took the seat closest to the wall, the one that faced the pillar instead of the dance floor, and settled in. No one spoke to him. That was fine. Preferred even. The ceremony had been brief and lovely. He'd stood in the back row and watched Ryan exchange vows with a woman named Diane, someone he didn't know, someone who seemed kind. They both looked the way happy people look when they're not performing it. Daniel had clapped when the room clapped, smiled when it seemed appropriate, and slipped out the side door before eye contact could become a conversation. Now at the reception he had a plan. Make it through dinner. That was the whole plan. After dinner, Lily Sophie would never know what time he left. A waiter swept past and filled his water glass. Daniel thanked him quietly. The two couples at his end of the table were now involved with a third couple at the next table over, all of them laughing about something that apparently required gesture. Daniel pulled out his phone and opened nothing. He just needed something to look at that wasn't the room. The music swelled. Guests streamed in from the terrace. He kept his eyes on his screen and scrolled through nothing. Then someone sat down next to him. He looked up. A woman in a deep olive dress had taken the chair to his left. She had auburn hair loosely pinned, a small clutch on the table, and the specific expression of someone quietly assessing the distance to the nearest exit. She was alone. No one following behind her. No saved seat. She looked at the table number, then at Daniel. "Table 22, she asked. "Yeah," he said. She exhaled something between relief and mild defeat. "Thank God. I thought I was going to end up at that table near the front where everyone knows each other." She gestured vaguely toward a round table packed with people who were already doing a group toast. "I would not have survived that." Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. She didn't seem to need a response. She leaned back, looked out at the room the same way he'd been looking at it, like someone watching a party through a window they hadn't been invited to open. After a moment, she turned to him. "I'm Maya, friend of the bride. Former co-worker. We haven't actually talked in about 2 years, so I'm not entirely sure why I'm here, but here I am." Daniel offered a small smile. Daniel, friend of the groom, also former, also a mystery invitation. Maya let out a short laugh. Not polished, not performative. Just the sound of someone recognizing something true. "So we're both here, out of obligation. More or less." Dinner arrived in courses. Salads that looked too precise to eat. Then roasted chicken with heirloom vegetables arranged in a way that suggested someone had been very serious about it. Daniel ate slowly. The two couples at their end of the table had migrated entirely to the next one, leaving Daniel and Maya in a quiet pocket of their own. Halfway through the meal, Maya set her fork down and looked at the room. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Daniel looked over. "Sure. Does this ever feel like a different country to you?" Like she gestured at the couples, the dancing already beginning near the front, the laughter, the ease of it all, like everyone else attended some orientation you missed, like there's a whole language being spoken and you just never learned it. Daniel felt something shift. It was the kind of question that assumed he already knew the answer. The kind that meant you didn't have to explain yourself before being understood. He set his own fork down. "Yeah," he said. "It does." Maya nodded. "I could tell. You've got that look. What looked like you've been on the outside for a while. Not sad exactly, just accustomed to the view." He didn't know whether that was an observation or a diagnosis. But it didn't sting. It felt strangely like being located, like someone had just pointed at him on a map. "I've got a daughter," he said. The words came out before he'd planned them. 17. Her mother left when she was 2. I've been doing it alone since then." Maya didn't pivot to sympathy, didn't soften into condolence. She just listened. "That's a long time to carry something by yourself," she said. "I didn't think of it as carrying it," Daniel said. "Someone had to show up. So I did." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "And what about showing up for yourself?" The question hit him somewhere he hadn't expected. He looked down at his hands. He had spent 15 years making sure Sophie had everything she needed. Stability, reliability, a father who stayed. He'd built his whole life around that one word, stay, and in doing so, he'd stopped asking himself what he needed. He'd become a function, a role, a constant, not a person. "I don't really know how to do that anymore," he said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Maya nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting that. "Yeah, I get that. I was married for 11 years. When my ex left 3 years ago, I spent the first 2 of those years just trying to find myself in a room I thought I knew. Turns out I'd made myself so small for so long trying to fit the shape he needed that I'd forgotten I was supposed to take up space." Daniel looked at her. Actually looked. He saw the tiredness in her eyes that wasn't tonight's tiredness, the kind that came from years of carrying something you'd convinced yourself was just the weight of being alive. They were not the same story. But they were close enough to understand each other. "It's terrifying," Maya said. "Isn't it the idea of letting someone actually see you, risking the possibility that they look and find nothing worth staying for?" Daniel's throat tightened. He had not come here to feel things. He had come here to survive. But the conversation had already gone somewhere he hadn't planned for, and he didn't want to walk it back. "Yeah," he said. "It is." They sat in silence after that, but it was the right kind of silence, the kind that 2 people share when they've both been quiet for too long in all the wrong rooms, and this one finally feels safe enough to stop performing. Then the music changed. The string quartet found something up-tempo, and couples began drifting toward the dance floor. Daniel watched them move easy, unguarded their bodies in conversation with each other. He felt the familiar pull to shrink, to put his phone back up, to disappear into the pillar. Before he could, Maya said, "You know what I just noticed?" He looked at her. "People keep looking over here." Daniel scanned the nearby tables. She was right. Glances, a whisper between a couple 2 tables over, eyes that had passed over them and come back. He hadn't noticed it before, but now that she'd said it, he could feel it, that particular weight of being observed. 2 people alone at the back table. 2 people who didn't come with anyone. "They're probably doing the math," Maya said, dry but not bitter. Wondering if we're together, wondering if we're tragic, constructing some whole narrative. Daniel felt heat crawl up his neck. He hated this. He'd spent 15 years perfecting the art of not being looked at, and the fact that two strangers at a wedding were now composing theories about him made his whole body want to exit. "I should go," he said, already pushing his chair back. "Don't," Maya said. Not forceful, firm. "If you leave right now, you're giving them the story. You're confirming the theory." He stopped. "I don't belong here," he said. He meant it as an explanation. It came out like a confession. "Neither do I," she said. "But we're here anyway. And I think that might be enough." Before he could respond, a voice came through the sound system, big, warm, the specific enthusiasm of a man who had just made several toasts. Ryan Holt stood at the front of the room with a microphone and a glass of champagne, grinning the way people grin when they're genuinely happy and they want the whole room to know it. "Before we get into the dancing, I need to take a second for a few people who really matter." Daniel felt his stomach drop. He knew. He knew before Ryan even said it. "First, and this is a long overdue one, I want to give a shout out to my old college roommate, Daniel Shaw. Man, I've been trying to get this guy to show up somewhere for years. He's here tonight. Daniel, stand up, buddy." 200 people turned. Applause. Polite, warm, generous applause. 200 faces finding him in the back corner, eyes settling on the man who'd been trying to be invisible. Daniel felt his entire body go rigid. He couldn't stand. He couldn't smile. He couldn't do anything except grip the edge of the table and hold on. Ryan raised his glass toward the back of the room, still smiling, completely unaware that he had just detonated something. "To old friends, and to showing up," he said. The crowd echoed it. The applause crested and faded, but the eyes lingered. 200 people had just been told where he was. 200 people were now looking at the man in the back corner alone at table 22, face going pale, hands white on the tablecloth. His breathing went shallow. His vision narrowed at the edges. He needed to leave. Right now, he needed to walk out of this room and get to his truck. And Maya turned in her chair, directly facing him, and said, not loud but clearly, "Look at me." His eyes snapped to hers. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't trying to make light of it. She was still present, steady in a way that cut right through the noise. "Hey," she said, quieter. "Just me. Not them. Me." He forced himself to hold her gaze, the warmth in her eyes, the fact that she was not looking at him with pity, not looking at him as a problem to solve. She was just looking at him the way you look at a person, like he was there, like he mattered. "You didn't run," she said softly. "That's not nothing." His heart rate was still elevated, but the tightness in his chest gave a little. Just enough. Ryan moved on to someone else. The attention shifted. The whispers dissolved back into the general warm noise of the evening, and Daniel sat in the aftermath, still here, still breathing, somehow still whole. Maya picked up her water glass and took a sip. "You okay?" "I think so," he said. He was almost surprised to find it was true. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the person at the back table, this one's for you. Drop a comment and let us know you're here. They stayed through dessert, through the last dance, through the slow exodus of couples gathering their things. They didn't go near the dance floor. They didn't seek out anyone from the main tables. They just talked. They talked about loneliness not as a dramatic condition, but as a quiet, ordinary thing that builds up over years of small decisions. About how it was possible to be a devoted parent, a reliable colleague, a decent neighbor, and still be completely invisible to yourself. About the specific exhaustion of performing fine for so long that you start to believe it. Maya told him about the first year after her divorce, how she'd relearned how to choose a restaurant for herself, what music she actually liked, whether she preferred the window seat or the aisle. All these tiny preferences she'd outsourced so long she'd thought they were gone. Daniel listened to all of it. He didn't try to fix any of it. And somewhere in that conversation, quietly, without announcement, he felt less alone than he had in 15 years. Not because someone needed him, because someone had just decided to sit next to him and stay. As the venue began to clear out, Maya gathered her clutch and stood. She looked at him with something warm but careful in her expression. "This was surprisingly good," she said, "talking to someone who gets it." "Yeah," Daniel said, standing. "It was." She hesitated. Then she reached into her clutch, pulled out a cocktail napkin, one of the venue's white ones slightly wrinkled from the evening, and picked up the small golf pencil from the table's floral arrangement. She wrote her number in clean, readable handwriting and set it in front of him. "If you ever want to do this again," she said. "Somewhere that's not a wedding." Daniel picked up the napkin, her name printed at the top in the same deliberate hand. A phone number below it. Nothing else, no title, no flourish. Just the information that would make a next conversation possible. He looked up at her. There were things he wanted to say, things that would have captured what the night had meant, but the words were somewhere just out of reach. So he did the only thing that felt honest. "I will," he said. Maya smiled. Small and real. "Good. Because you deserve to take up space in your own life, Daniel. It's not too late." She turned and walked toward the exit, her olive dress catching the light, and he stood there at table 22, the back table, the invisible table, holding a cocktail napkin, and feeling something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Not relief, not resolution, just the fragile, specific weight of hope. He drove home on Highway 71 with the napkin on the passenger seat. At every red light he glanced at it, made sure it was still there. When he pulled into his driveway in East Austin, he sat with the engine off for a few minutes. The house was dark except for the porch light, which Sophie always left on. Always. Even when she was annoyed at him. Even when they'd argued. The porch light was her version of, "I know you're coming back." He folded the napkin carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket before going inside. Sophie was on the couch, laptop, open mug of tea cooling beside her. She looked up with the particular expression of someone who had been trying not to look like they were waiting. So she asked. He hung his jacket on the hook. He could feel the napkin through the fabric. "It was fine," he said. Sophie narrowed her eyes. She had a talent for finding the thing underneath fine. "Just fine." He sat in the chair across from her and rubbed his face. "I talked to someone, a woman. She was there alone too." Sophie's laptop closed, decisively, and we talked. That's it. She looked at him with that small knowing smile, the one that said she could see a lot more than he was showing her. "Good, Dad. That's really good." He didn't respond. He wasn't sure good was the right word. He wasn't sure what the right word was. He only knew that for a few hours he had been a person, not just a father, not just a function. And now, sitting in the quiet of his own house, he felt the absence of that more sharply than he'd felt anything in years. The next few days moved like they were reluctant to go anywhere. Daniel went to work, came home, made dinner. The routine that had always felt like structure now felt like a holding pattern. He found himself thinking about Maya at odd moments, rinsing dishes, driving to the grocery store, staring at the ceiling at 11 o'clock. He thought about the way she'd looked at him when she said just me, not them. The way she hadn't flinched when he admitted he didn't know how to show up for himself. The way she'd understood without needing a map. He told himself it was a moment, a brief random connection between two lonely people who'd been assigned the same table. It didn't mean anything. It didn't have to become anything. But every time he passed his jacket by the door, he thought about the napkin in the pocket. On the fourth day, Sophie found him in the kitchen with his phone in his hand doing nothing. She leaned against the counter. "You're going to call her, right?" Daniel set the phone down. "I don't know what you're talking about. You've been weird since Saturday. You keep looking at your jacket." She gestured at the hook by the door with the ease of someone who'd been watching him his whole life. "Sophie, just call her." "It's not that simple," he said. "Why not?" He tried to find the honest answer. "Because I haven't let anyone close in 15 years. Because vulnerability feels like standing on the edge of something with no idea how far down it goes. Because the last time I trusted someone to stay, they didn't. Because I don't know how to do this anymore," he finally said. Sophie's face changed. She walked over and sat at the table, gestured to the chair across from her. He sat. "Dad," she said, "you've spent my whole life being the most reliable person I've ever known. And I'm grateful. I'm so grateful. But I'm leaving in 4 months, and I genuinely need to know that you're going to be okay when I'm gone." "I'll be fine," he said. Being fine and being okay are not the same thing. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "You taught me that it's okay to need people. You've said it 100 times. So why won't you let yourself do it?" Daniel looked at his daughter. He thought about the woman she'd become, thoughtful, direct, unafraid to call things by their right names. "What if it doesn't work out?" he asked, quietly. "Then it doesn't work out," Sophie said. "But you showed up. That's what matters." That night, after Sophie went upstairs to study, Daniel sat on the couch and pulled the folded napkin from his jacket pocket. He'd handled it enough times that it was soft at the creases. He looked at the number for a long moment. He thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. He thought about the safety of his sealed-off routine, about the 15 years of walls, each one built carefully on top of the last. And then he thought about Maya's voice in that vineyard hall. You deserve to take up space in your own life. He hit call before he'd fully made the decision. 1 ring, 2, 3. He was composing the voicemail in his head when she picked up. Hello. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it. Calm. Real. Maya, he said. It's Daniel. From the wedding. A brief pause. Then a soft laugh, the kind you can hear someone meaning. I was starting to think you'd lost the napkin. Almost did, he said. Once on purpose. I figured. Her tone warmed. I'm glad you called. They talked for an hour and a half about everything and nothing. About Sophie leaving in 4 months, about Maya's graphic design clients, about what it felt like to be in your early 40s and realize you'd somehow missed the exit for your own life. About how exhausting it was to keep performing I'm doing great for people who didn't really want the real answer anyway. And somewhere in the middle of that call, Daniel realized he was sitting in his living room in the dark, smiling at the wall. Not out of politeness. Not because the situation required it. Because he wanted to. Before they hung up, Maya asked if he wanted to get coffee. He said yes, before she'd finished the sentence. They picked a day. A place she knew on South Congress, a cafe that also sold vinyl records, the kind of spot that had figured out it could be 2 things at once. When the call ended, Daniel sat in the quiet with the phone in his lap and felt something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Anticipation. Just that. Not dread. Not the hollow weight of obligation. The clean, simple pull towards something he actually wanted. The coffee on South Congress became a second and then a third. Black wax coffee was everything. The vineyard wasn't mismatched. Chairs warm, lighting from vintage fixtures, somebody's record collection spinning in the background. Maya ordered the same thing every time, an oat milk latte extra shot, no sugar. Daniel had a black coffee and let the music fill the space when the conversation needed a breath. She was easy to talk to in the way that rare people are, the kind who don't require you to be performing while you're talking to them. She asked questions that were genuinely curious. She didn't rush his answers. When she disagreed with him, she said so plainly without architecture. She told him about her marriage. Not the dramatic version, the quiet version, which was harder. The slow, incremental way she'd made herself smaller. The way she'd stopped expressing preferences about things that seemed small: restaurants, paint colors, weekend plans, and then discovered 3 years after her divorce that she'd stopped having preferences at all. That she'd have to relearn them from scratch, the way you learn to walk again after something's been broken. Daniel understood. Not the same injury, but the same mechanism. The same way a person could disappear one small compromise at a time until there was almost nothing left to find. The first year after was the hardest, Maya said one evening, her coffee half gone. Not because I missed him. I didn't, honestly, not after the first few months. But because I'd organized my entire sense of self around being in relation to someone. And when that was gone, I had no idea what I was in relation to. Daniel turned his cup slowly on the table. I did the same thing, just with parenthood instead of a marriage. Sophie needed me to be her whole world for so long that I forgot to maintain a world of my own. Maya looked at him. And now she's leaving. In 4 months, he said, give or take. She was quiet for a moment. That's terrifying. Yeah. And you're here anyway. That's not nothing. He looked at her across the small table, the record player turning something slow in the background, and thought that if this was what it felt like to take up space again, it was worth whatever came next. A few weeks in, Daniel brought Maya to the house. Sophie was upstairs doing homework. He'd mentioned Maya once in a casual way. I've been getting coffee with someone, and Sophie had responded with an extremely controlled expression that told him she had 1,000 things to say, and was generously choosing not to say them yet. When Sophie came downstairs and found her father in the kitchen with a woman she'd never met, she stopped in the doorway, did the full assessment in about 3 seconds. Maya extended her hand. You must be Sophie. Your dad talks about you constantly. I know about the environmental science program, the AP bio disaster of sophomore year, and the fact that you make better guacamole than he does. Sophie shook her hand. Then she looked at Daniel with an expression that said, this one's fine, good job. Nice to meet you, Sophie said. They sat at the kitchen table for over an hour. Maya asked about the university, about what Sophie was excited for, about what she was afraid of, and Sophie, who is usually cautious with new people, opened up in a way that surprised Daniel. She talked about wanting to work in environmental policy, eventually about the strange guilt of being excited to leave, when her dad would be alone, about the specific terror of being ready for something, and not quite trusting that readiness. Maya listened to all of it, and when Sophie finished, she said something quietly that made Daniel's chest feel full and tight at the same time. "Your dad's going to be fine. And not just okay fine, actually fine. He's stronger than he's been giving himself credit for." Sophie looked at Daniel then, the kind of look that meant she'd already known it, and it felt good to have someone else say it out loud. "Yeah," she said. "I know." After Maya left that night, Sophie sat beside him on the couch. She leaned her head on his shoulder, something she hadn't done in a couple of years. It was a small thing, and it wasn't small at all. "I like her," she said. Daniel put his arm around her. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." Summer arrived the way it does in Austin, absolute and immediate. The weeks blurred, packing boxes, running errands for dorm supplies, eating the meals that were starting to feel like lasts. The last Tuesday taco run, the last morning where Sophie came downstairs at 10 and took his coffee without asking. Nora Maya was around through most of it, helping carry boxes when she could, disappearing when they needed space. She never pushed, never arrived with an agenda. She just made herself available and let them set the terms. That steadiness meant more to Daniel than anything he could have asked for. The morning they drove Sophie down to San Antonio for move-in, Daniel was up at 6. He stood in the kitchen making coffee and looked at the invitation that was still on the fridge. The wedding invitation, the one Sophie had put there to stop him from throwing it away. It was wrinkled at the edges now. He left it there. The dorm building smelled like fresh paint, and the particular nervous energy of 100 families, all having the same bittersweet Tuesday. He carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs. He assembled furniture from instructions he didn't need instructions for. He made the bed twice because the first time he tucked the corners the way he had when she was 7 and she caught him doing it and they both laughed. When everything was done and the room looked like a room, Sophie walked him back down to the parking lot. She stopped at the truck and looked at him with the same focused, patient expression she'd had the morning she'd put the wedding invitation on the fridge. "Promise me," she said. "Promise me you're not going to go home and disappear." Daniel pulled her into a hug. He held on. "I promise." She stepped back and wiped her eyes once quick, like she wasn't going to allow more than that. "I need you to be happy, Dad. Not just managing. Actually happy." He nodded. His throat was too full for words. He watched her walk back through the glass doors, straight shoulders, steady steps. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew he'd be there if she did. He stood in the parking lot until she was through the doors and gone. The drive back to Austin was the longest 2 hours he'd had in years. He called Maya from the road. She picked up on the second ring and talked to him for the whole drive. Nothing specific. Nothing that required him to respond much. Just her voice on the other end of the call, steady and present, while the highway moved under him and the sky went from blue to pink to the deep bruised purple of a Texas dusk. When he pulled into the driveway, the porch light was off. He sat in the truck and looked at the dark house. Sophie's car was gone. Her room still had things in it, but the absence was louder than any of them. He went inside and sat on the couch and let himself feel it, the grief of it, the genuine ache of a chapter ending, and the strange, complicated pride of having raised someone strong enough to leave well. He let all of it sit. He didn't push it away. He didn't reach for the TV. Maya came over that night. She didn't say much when she arrived. She just sat beside him and let the quiet be what it needed to be. When he finally spoke, his voice came out rough but steady. "I don't know who I am without this being the main thing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all the space." Maya took his hand. "You don't have to figure that out tonight. You just keep showing up, one day at a time. And if this story is landing somewhere real for you, go ahead and hit that like button. Stories like this one don't happen without you being here." Over the next year, Daniel learned what one day at a time actually meant. He and Maya had dinner. They had arguments about small things and talked their way through bigger ones. They took a weekend trip to Marfa, the kind of drive he'd told himself for years he didn't have time for. He stood in a field watching light installations glow in the dark desert, and he felt something ease in him that had been Oldovan, tensed for a very long time. He learned that love didn't require him to dissolve. That being known by someone didn't have to mean becoming smaller. That he could be Daniel Shaw, father, teacher, person all at once, and none of those things had to cannibalize the others. He learned that happiness was not a debt you ran up and eventually had to pay back. It was just something you showed up for, over and over. Sophie came home for Thanksgiving. They cooked all three of them in the kitchen of the craftsman bungalow, Daniel and Maya, moving around each other with the easy shorthand of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Sophie watched them from the kitchen doorway, a glass of cider in her hand, and she had a look on her face that Daniel had not seen her wear since she was small, pure, uncomplicated happiness for someone else. After dinner, she pulled him aside. "You look different," she said. Different how she thought about it, really considered it. Then, like you're actually in the room. Like you're not watching from the back table anymore. A year after Ryan's wedding, Ryan and Diane threw a first anniversary party. Same venue, same vineyard estate out in the hill country. Same soaring ceilings with Edison lights, same linen, same string quartet in the corner. Daniel did not park at the far edge of the lot. He did not sit with his back to the room. He did not spend 20 minutes in his truck talking himself out of the parking lot. He walked in with Maya beside him, and they found people they knew, and they talked, and he laughed at things that were funny, and he didn't feel like he was watching the party through glass. When Ryan raised his glass for a toast and caught Daniel's eye across the room, Daniel raised his back without hesitation. Later, walking out to the parking lot under a sky that was dense with stars, the way it only is outside the city, Maya looked over at him. "You doing okay?" Daniel thought about the question. He thought about the man who'd pulled into this same parking lot 1 year ago, gripping a steering wheel, convincing himself he could still leave. He thought about the years of walls, the slow, patient work of learning to come down from them. He thought about Sophie, who called him every Sunday and led with something she'd learned that week. He thought about the fact that he no longer felt like he was being eroded by his own invisibility. "Yeah," he said. He meant it fully without qualification. "I'm okay." Maya smiled and slipped her hand into his. They walked to the truck together, two people who had learned the same lesson through different doors. That invisibility felt safe. That being seen felt terrifying. And that neither of those facts was a good enough reason to keep hiding. Daniel Shaw had spent 15 years making himself small. He'd done it out of love. He'd done it with intention. And there was nothing shameful in that. It was one of the best things he'd ever done. But standing here now, under a sky full of stars, with someone who knew his name and his history, and the specific shape of his fear, he understood what Sophie had been telling him from the beginning. Being a good father had never required him to disappear. And the bravest thing he'd done in 15 years wasn't the decade and a half of showing up for someone else. It was the night he finally quietly showed up for himself.